This is Jim Bakker. If you're unfamiliar, he's a televangelist who went to jail in the 80s or 90s, I think through the 90s. He was in jail for 7 years for wire fraud and a whole bunch of other stuff. He basically claimed that he was going to use his congregants' donations for something and then lied about it, used it for something completely unrelated, also slept with his secretary. Slept with isn't the correct term, but I don't feel like I can use the correct term on YouTube, if you know what I'm saying. It was not good. It was not good at all. So anyways, he went to jail for 7 years. He was sentenced to 15. And he eventually appealed all the way up. Appeal. So one of the judges determined that he was wronged, that he does deserve to get out because he was religiously persecuted by getting the decision that he got because the judge that originally sentenced him said, you're basically something to the effect of you're an embarrassment to Christianity. Which, of course, he is. So anyways, he gets out of jail after 7 of his 15 years were served. And guess what? Starts his TV show all over again. And what's he got going on this TV show that he has? This episode's called Woke Jesus, The False Messiah Destroying Christianity with Lucas Miles. Really, I am dead serious. So I wanted to listen to it, see what these people have to say about woke Jesus. While we watch this, we're going to play some Breath of the Wild 2. I'm not going to spoil anything. I'm just going to run around getting shrines. So technically, I've nearly beaten the game. I've already beaten it once before. This is my second go-through. But yeah, I'm not going to spoil anything. We're just going to go through and just kind of grind and stuff. So, all right, let's give this a listen.
The left has found this thing called public health, and they are using that to trump the United States Constitution. Our
Public health trumps the U.S. Constitution. Wow, okay.
Freedoms in this world. We saw that during COVID.
Yeah.
You know, our Constitution, it's, nothing trumps the Constitution unless there's a danger to everybody.
Well, see, that's the thing. It's always worked that way. This has been decided upon over and over and over again. Do you know that DUI checkpoints have existed for since cars have existed or something? A long time, right? DUI checkpoints been around for ever. But it's okay, despite the fact that DUI checkpoints are effectively a violation of our Fourth Amendment right against search and seizure, unlawful search and seizure. DUI checkpoints have been ruled constitutional consistently because it's for public safety. Back in 1918, when the Spanish flu was being passed around, it was deemed lawful to force somebody to wear a mask by law. You could force somebody to wear a mask. If they didn't, then they would go to jail. Really. All the way back then. There have always been exceptions to the constitutional rights that we have. You know why? Because rights come with responsibilities. You have a right to vote, but you have a responsibility to register to vote, to ensure that your right is not being taken advantage of, or you're not lying about who you are or whatever. You have a right to freedom of speech, but you also have the responsibility with that right not to get people hurt with your speech. If you say something like, this is a common example always given, it's not actually in the Constitution or whatever, but if you yell fire in a crowded theater and there is no fire, you can get in trouble. Or if you talk about, for example, killing certain people, or if you instruct people to kill, certain specific people, you can go to jail for that. Your rights are not being infringed if you're not taking those rights seriously and using them responsibly. So rights come with responsibilities. Gun rights come with responsibilities. Now, the United States is suddenly completely forgotten about responsibilities and how they correlate with rights when it comes to guns. But you're supposed to register your weapon. You're supposed to have a background check. You should, at the very least, have a background check to make sure that you're not a felon or something. Felons are not allowed to have guns, to my knowledge. Not allowed to have guns if you're on probation. Rights come with responsibilities. And your right to wander around and do what you want is tempered with the responsibility of making sure that society is not being affected by the decisions that you make. So what he's saying here, public health and all this stuff, it's just completely made up. He has no idea what he's talking about.
Then it gives them a right to operate with tyrannical leadership. In the book, I introduce a concept in theology that's known as sphere sovereignty. And so when you look at how God created this world, he gave certain realms of authority to different people. Presidents and rulers and kings have authority over nations.
Right.
Fathers and parents have authority over the home. Pastors and elders have authority over the church. Each of us have authority over our individual bodies. You know, if somebody violates your individual body, we call that assault.
That's bodily autonomy that he's referring to. Yes, we do have bodily autonomy in the United States, according to the law. Like the law has said that we have bodily autonomy. Yes, go on.
And so there's a realm of authority. What the state did during COVID is they came in and they usurped these realms of authority. They began telling the church what to do when it's not their job to tell the church what to do.
That's right.
Well, no, that's not right. You have a responsibility as a citizen of this country to protect your fellow citizens, to make sure that you are not harming them in the process of whatever, in the process of holding church service or running your business or whatever it is you do. You have a responsibility to make sure the people are not hurt. Rights come with responsibilities. Apparently, these people just completely forgot about that. What he's referring to here are, the rights that are delineated in the Constitution. We have a right to bodily autonomy. We have a right to privacy, a right to this and that, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, the government, let me get specific. The government never told the church they had to shut down and stop holding services at any point ever. There was never a federal lockdown. Now, state to state, some states told churches that they had to hold services online rather than in person. Or they could hold their services outside if they chose, rather than online. Or they could space their chairs out 6 feet. Gave them a ton of options. You had a billion options, and what did you choose? None of them. You chose to pretend you were persecuted. It's a joke. So anyways, the church was never told you're not allowed to, blah, 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 whatever. You're not allowed to hold services. Never said that, ever. You were simply instructed to hold it outside or be careful or look out for your fellow man or whatever other thing. But go ahead and continue to pretend you're the victim.
Realms of authority. They began telling parents what to do. And we're seeing that continue with this, the transgender issue.
Yeah.
We have, states that are saying if your kid wants to transition and you don't accept this, then you're in danger of having your child taken away.
Okay, that's completely made up. Completely made up. I have no idea what he's even talking about. That's not happening right now. If your kid wants to transition, they're out of luck until they're 18. That's the law. From my understanding, there were somewhere in the range of a couple of hundred top surgeries for people that were 15 to 18 years old last year. That's not bottom surgery. That's against the law, always has been. And that's not without parents' consent, to my knowledge, either. You have to have parents' consent to have medical procedures done on a minor. Always have. But okay, keep fear-mongering.
As a result of this, they're violating these spheres of sovereignty because they have no respect for God's created order.
That's exactly right.
I want you to
perfect.
explain the future building blocks of heresy that you write about.
Yeah, so In order to really understand wokeism, I think properly
Wokeism. Understand wokeism properly. This is just painful, dude.
in the church specifically, we have to understand a movement that happened during actually the 1700s. It started, and it's so important to understand the future. Sometime you have to look back to the past. And what I write about was known as the quest for the historical Jesus. And there was a time after the Enlightenment and the post-Enlightenment period where there was such an emphasis on human reason and human logic that some of the miracles in the Bible, they started questioning them for the first time. So really for the first time, people started looking at Scripture and going, did that really happen? These people used to believe in, fables and myths and, fairy tales, but now with our scientific method and Darwinism that we had in the 1800s.
Darwinism. Isn't that interesting? Again, another example of them attacking, quote-unquote, Darwinism. Just like in the book, wait, how far into this are we? An hour and 30? Yeah. I don't remember if I mentioned Protocols of the Elders of Zion in this part or in the previous part, so I'm just going to mention it again real quick. Just like in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, written in 1902 in Tsarist Russia, to demonize Jews all the way back then, just like what they had to say at that time. They're using Darwinism and communism and Marxism and everything else to demonize the people that they don't like, to claim that there's some plot out there to destroy the things that they love, that they care about the most. I put a timestamp on screen if you've already heard this. Just skip to the timestamp on screen if you're just listening. In 1902, newspapers in Tsarist Russia start publishing this document called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. They came up with, I don't know, like 15 or 18 of them, or I don't remember exactly how many. They claimed that they found these documents on dead Jewish soldiers, and they were like articles that describe how the Jews were going to like accomplish world domination. Now, this is completely made up. It was anti-Semitic propaganda, obviously. There was no dead Jewish soldier. There were no elders of Zion. It was all completely fabricated from the ground up. But it was used to demonize a minority group within the country. And if there's one thing we've learned over the past couple of years even, it's that fascists and extremists love to blame all of their problems on minorities. Hitler, when he eventually came around, even reprinted copies of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and wrote about it in Mein Kampf, like talked about how the Jews are trying to take over and all this other stuff. But in 1923, about 20 years after it came out, it was discovered that the Protocols of the Elders of Zion was actually plagiarized, full-blown, copied and pasted, or the writing version of copied and pasted, the early 1900s version of copy and paste, straight from an 1854 satire book, a French satire book that didn't even mention Jews. It was just straight up plagiarized. 80% of it was plagiarized from this 1854 book, thus putting the final nail in the coffin, proving that this was completely forged. It was fake. It was just propagandistic bullshit created by, anti-Semites to destroy the Jewish community. So that is what the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is. This is actually a copy of it right here, Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Now, it was compiled into a book in 1905 called Protocols of the Meetings of the Learned Elders of Zion, a little bit longer, but yeah, it's all fake. It was all completely faked. I'm not exactly sure how many protocols there are, 10 at least. There may be more than that. Well, anyway, protocols includes things like, just listen to like one or two lines here. In miserable Russia, the Jews are less than 5% of the population, yet they hold over 90% of the official positions. Russians and Jews are very much different, yet Russia is governed by a mere handful of unprincipled Jews. The 95% of Russians have only a 10% say-so about their own government, and even the 10% in office are but lickspittle, or fronts, to the domineering Jews. To the reasoning mind, such a condition of affairs seems impossible, yet the condition exists. In fact, a careful study to the protocols alone will clear up the mystery. Now that you've read that one sentence from The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a book supposedly discovered on a dead Jewish soldier, written by Jews in power. Listen to what this televangelist Lance Wallnau says. He's about to explain Seven Mountains Dominionism, or the Seven Mountains Mandate, which is the televangelist's plan to take control of the country. I'm not joking. This is from early March 2022.
3% of the population, roughly 3 to 4% of the population, are radical leftist elites. 30% of the population are evangelical born-again Christians that are inclined to go towards Pentecostal language. I mean, we're really out there. 30% against 3%, but they neutralize the church because they're also in religion. They changed the definition of marriage, so they've taken over family. They've totally taken over academia, so the education institutions are teaching leftist theology or leftist ideology and silencing conservatives. They're controlling government right now. They've taken over legacy media, Hollywood, entertainment, and arts, and now they've got Wall Street.
These are the 7 mountains, the 7 areas of society that they want to take over to control society in a Christian nationalist state, is what he's describing right now. This came straight out of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, directly lifted from it. Did Lance Wallnau lift it? I don't know. Somebody did and provided this information to him, and he started repeating it. Somebody lifted it directly from Protocols.
This is 3%. 30% of the population is Christian. How is it that 30% are dominated by 3%? They have a worldview for bringing their kingdom here now.
I'm dead serious. This came straight from Protocols. Jews are less than 5% of the population, yet hold over 90% of the official positions. Russians and Jews are very much different, yet Russia's governed by a mere handful of unprincipled Jews. I mean, you're seeing the similarities, right? There are other similarities. I can't find it at this moment, but there's another part that talks about Jews attempting to spread Darwinism and Marxism through society because they're wonderfully destructive ideologies. They're trying to spread them through society to destroy society. Does this sound familiar? Darwinism, Marxism, saying that they destroy society. The leftists are setting out to destroy it. Seriously. Word for word, the tactics being used on the right at the moment. That's what Protocols of Elders of Zion is. That's what it's all about. That's where a lot of televangelists are getting their ideas from. Directly, I don't know. Setting out to deceive, I don't know. Are they even aware of this document? I have no idea. But it's copied word for word in some situations, and it's uncanny. Oh, here's another one. The idea that Jews eat babies, or that the elites drink adrenochrome from children. That's straight from Protocols of the Elders of Zion. QAnon is nothing more than a rebranded Nazi death cult. Every conspiracy theory you can come up with came from this document. The conspiracy theory that Jews eat babies or that they drink the blood of children, that's from Protocols. Protocols of the Elders of Zion. The idea that they control the big banks and the media and all of the other stuff, Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It's from this document right here. The conspiracy theory that they try to cancel people that they don't like, cancel culture, Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It's all from this. The idea that Marxism and Darwinism are evil and that they're trying to use it to destroy society, Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It's all from this. Every conspiracy theory in the past 100 years that you can think of. The Great Replacement, where they're trying to bring in other groups of immigrants to destroy our culture and to outweigh votes and things like that. Protocols of the Elders of Zion. The conspiracy theory that Jewish people are trying to enslave the world or whatever other thing, it's all from this book. Dead serious. This is where pretty much all anti-Semitism stems from, or, well, I guess that's not exactly accurate. This is a compilation of all anti-Semitism from the past 1,000 years. It was all put into a book right here, and it was passed around Nazi Germany. And, get this, it was passed around the Middle East by the KGB in the 20th century. passed around in Iran and Saudi Arabia and all of the other Middle Eastern countries in that area, Egypt and all of them, by the KGB to make the Middle East hate Israel even more. That's at least part of the reason why Iran absolutely hates Israel and why they're Holocaust deniers. Or not Iran necessarily, but the leadership in Iran. That's why they're like that. Because the KGB passed these conspiracy theories around over the past 100 years.
And these things, does this really line up? And so there was a group of theologians and pastors in Germany that went for what they called a quest to discover the real Jesus when you cut away all of the, I'll use a modern term, the mytho-history of the New Testament. And so they started imagining Jesus minus the miracles. And it ended up producing a Jesus who was really more the great social organizer than the savior of the world. And so this infiltrated our Bible colleges in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And
Dude, is he talking about like an actual movement? What the hell is he talking about right now? I've never heard of this before, and I am probably more invested in, religious doctrines than nearly anybody, certainly more than he is. I've been watching this stuff like a hawk for years. What is this dude even referring to right now? I've never heard of this supposed doctrine he's referring to.
This idea still pushes forward today, where we see Jesus more as a human who was a great example rather than a savior who is our Redeemer, our Lord, our King.
Yes.
No. What are you talking about?
Oh,
You say in your book that
perfect.
the silence of the church to tackle like social issues and all the things, the needs of people and moral issues, it's created a spiritual vacuum in our culture.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a minute?
Yeah,
What, a spiritual vacuum? What was that again? Let me just step back. Listen again.
To tackle like social issues and all the things, the needs of people and moral issues, it's created a spiritual vacuum in our culture.
yeah.
Can you talk about
What is he talking about?
that a minute?
Yeah, I think one of the greatest lies in Christianity is the belief that certain issues in regards to morality are political. We have pastors that have bought the lie that abortion's political,
Oh.
or that
No, abortion isn't political. Abortion isn't religious either. Abortion is simply, a procedure, a medical procedure that takes place. One, by the way, that God endorses at Numbers 5:11-23. That God specifically describes and explains the circumstances under which you should have one. But, right out the window. Forget it. Don't even think about it. Pretend it isn't even in the Bible. You know why they do that? Why they pretend it's not there? Because it's inconvenient to them. Because they don't like those verses. They don't want those to be in there, so they pretend they're not.
sexuality is political, or that things like parents' rights is a political topic. Those aren't political topics. Those are all theological
That's
topics.
right.
They're moral
Absolutely.
issues. And so as long as
Like, no, none of this. This is all completely made up. This guy is doing everything he can to make people feel like they are persecuted and that they're being gaslit, that they're changing, that the world is trying to change around the way that everything works or change around the way society views things or whatever else. It's all made up.
Christians think that these things are political, and this is the goal of the state, it's the goal of the left, to be able to get Christians to think, well, I can't talk about these things because those are political and separation of church and state and all of this. The separation of church and state, the way it was intended, was so that the state would never be close enough to the church to tell it what to do. And we've seen that violate. And so
No, that's not the reason that separation of church and state existed, actually. Is that what he just said? Hold on. Let me step back. Listen to this again. 25. Listen one more time here.
and separation of church and state and all of this. The separation of church and state, the way it was intended, was so that the state would never be close enough to the church to tell it what to do.
Okay, here's the interesting thing about this whole thing that he just said here, right? When the Founding Fathers were creating the government, they created three branches. They created the legislative branch, which is Congress, the Senate, so on and so forth. They created the executive branch, which at the time was simply the presidency. Now it's expanded out into like the FBI, and there are a bunch of other. Anyways. And then they created the judicial branch. Now, the judicial branch exists to litigate certain things, to figure out what the meaning of certain laws were supposed to be originally, so that the judges could determine what these lawmakers meant when they wrote this down. Because, lawmakers die and laws get old, that kind of thing. But the interesting thing about this, about separation of church and state, is that we don't need the judicial branch to help us figure out what the meaning was supposed to be of separation of church and state. You know why we don't need the judicial branch to determine that for us? Well, first of all, it already has. But second of all, the guy who wrote it explained it, plain as day, told us what he meant when he wrote the first sentence of the First Amendment of the Constitution. He explained what he meant by it. James Madison wrote that, by the way, with the assistance of Thomas Jefferson. Now, Thomas Jefferson wrote these letters that explained what these things meant, like what he meant when he said separation of church and state. He wrote a letter to Danbury Church, because Danbury Church was communicating with him, and they said to him, look, there's a state church in Connecticut. It's a Calvinist denomination, and we're not Calvinist, we're Baptist. And I don't like the fact that there's a Calvinist denomination in charge right now. So Thomas Jefferson writes back to Danbury Church, and he says, you know what? You're absolutely right. The First Amendment of the Constitution, the first sentence of the First Amendment of the Constitution does, in fact, say there will be a separation between church and state. It does, in fact, say that there should be no state church. Yet, here we sit with a state church in Connecticut, this Calvinist denomination. So what are we going to do about it? Eventually, Thomas Jefferson went on to become president later, I believe, and did away with that. Eventually, the judiciary eventually determined that there shouldn't be a state church, and it banned this Calvinist denomination from operating as the state church within Connecticut, as the Danbury Baptist Church requested. That was the original meaning of the separation of church and state. Again, we don't need the judiciary to help us figure this out. It's already been litigated and determined long and long ago. But people like David Barton, specifically, propagandized about it, twisted it around, pretended that, church and state separation was only intended to protect the church, not the state, that the state it's open season for the state. The church can do whatever they want, get involved and force people to worship and whatever, doesn't matter, whatever they want. And apparently this guy's picked up on that. He agrees, evidently. He's running with it. He says, yeah, absolutely. It's just embarrassing and sad when you see people twisting things around like this, lying, seemingly knowingly, not telling the truth. He must know that's not what the First Amendment was intended for, right? He must know that.
And we've seen that violate. And so that the church would always be close enough to the state in order to be her conscience. Mm-hmm. And it's so important that we recognize.
Wow. So he thinks that the founding fathers believed that the church should be in control of the state. Like that's a necessary part of the equation. That the founding fathers wanted the church to be part of the state? What? Are you kidding me? There's no logic to be found in here. None.
Close enough to the church to tell it what to do. And we've seen that violate. And so that the church would always be close enough to the state in order to be her conscience. And it's so important that we recognize that these topics are not political. And I just speak to the pastors out there. Pastors, it is time to be bold. It is time to speak out. It is time to educate yourself about these topics. I've actually launched a website called AmericanPastorProject.org, where pastors can go and sign a statement that they're going to commit to biblical orthodoxy. And
Dude, why would anybody need to sign a statement like that? Like, what a disturbing thing to set up. You're going to have people sign a statement that they're going to commit to biblical orthodoxy? What the hell does that even mean? Like, I can't even express how disturbing it is that he's saying all this stuff right now. Seriously. What the hell is going on right now?
that they are going to stand against wokeism in the pulpit.
Everything is biblical.
Yes.
Everything
100%.
is based in the Bible. This is the guidebook for life. Is the living Bible.
Yes.
We need God's word, and for them to say we can't use it, they outlawed one state. Had taken the Bible out of the libraries in the school last month.
Yeah,
that was Utah, and it's an interesting thing that he says that. He says, well, they're going to tell us we can't use it. No, they're telling you that you're not allowed to mix church and state. That's what it's always been. Now, these people are Christian nationalists and will do whatever it takes to mix the two and completely disregard what the Constitution says explicitly in the first sentence in the First Amendment. Now, the reason that Utah removed the Bible from school libraries kind of bothers me a little bit. Let me explain the situation, okay? Utah and other states set out to ban certain books from classrooms. They said, we don't want these books in the classrooms, so we're going to ban them. And it was like gay books and stuff because they're too explicit, they said. Books about the LGBT community, books that help kids figure out who they are. They banned these books, right? Because they're, quote unquote, too explicit. So activists come along and they said, you know what? If you're going to claim that these books are too explicit for the classroom, then you're going to have to ban the Bible too, because it's even more explicit than these books are. You ever read the book of the Song of Solomon? That's pretty explicit. Doesn't get more explicit than the Song of Solomon, honestly. And instead of getting the message and saying, you know what, you're right. Sometimes certain things are acceptable. Sometimes it's not that big of a deal to have certain books in the classroom, even if it has some questionable material in there. It's not like we're sitting in a classroom reading it to kids. It's their option. They have the choice of going there and reading these books if they want to. So, okay, you know what? We're going to leave the Bible in there, and we're going to put the other books back too. That's what the activists wanted. What did Utah do? They said, yeah, you're right, totally. The Bible is too graphic, so we're going to remove the Bible too. They got the wrong message. It went right over their heads. We don't want the Bible removed. We want the others put back. Like, they have no idea what's going on right now. They're just lost. It's just a joke, man. That's why they're talking about the Bible being removed. We don't want I'm talking as an atheist. I'm speaking for atheists right now. We don't want the Bible out of school libraries. We want everything else put back.
And for them to say we can't use it, they outlawed one state had taken the Bible out of the libraries in the school last month.
Yeah.
Utah.
They're getting it back in now.
Yeah.
Thank God, because people just protested.
And what about the other books that they removed? Are those going to get put back in? Of course they're not. They just wanted to cause a huge ruckus, a big problem for everybody. They wanted to make it into a big deal that the Bible was being taken out, instead of just leaving the other books in. Don't remove books from classrooms. You know, back in, when was it? I'm trying to remember. 2001 maybe. There was this whole Dr. Seuss thing, right? So Dr. Seuss, back in the day, used to be really racist. Used to have some really racist stuff, some racist stereotypes and tropes in his books back in the day, long and long ago. And the company that owns Dr. Seuss books made a determination for their company that they were going to stop publishing some of those books because they wanted to. Not because anyone was making, this public outcry over it. Not because of any of that stuff. It was just, they felt that it was time to kind of let go of these books and move on. Private decision made for a private company, right? This is from 2021, early March 2021. And what did Glenn Beck have to say about it when this happened?
They are banning Dr. Seuss books.
They were not, but okay.
How much more do you need to see before all of America wakes up and goes, this is fascism? This is fascism. You don't destroy books.
Isn't that fascinating? 2021, he says, this is fascism. You don't destroy books. 2023, we've got the right saying, we do want to destroy books. We do want to take them out of libraries and classrooms and everything else. We want them out. Put the Bible in, take everything else out. The hypocrisy is impossible to avoid. How they don't hang their head in embarrassment, I will never know, honestly. How these people live with themselves without dying of embarrassment, I will never understand.
But this is where they're headed.
Yeah.
And so there's such extremes that people are going to. So there's
Such extremes people are going to, removing the Bible. Yeah. You know why we did that? To make a point. To try to make it clear to you that banning books is a bad idea. Don't do it. Did you learn from that? Of course he didn't. Didn't learn shit.
other extremes you talk about here in the book about preachers going too far to exclude people, such as the example of the Tennessee preacher you talk about who delivered a sermon entitled Why Leviticus 20:13 should still be enforced.
Yeah, I've been really,
Wait, Leviticus 20:13. What is that? Leviticus. Okay, here's Leviticus 20:13. Generally considered to prohibit homosexual intercourse between men. Here's what it says: if a man has sexual relations with a man as one does with a woman, both of them have done what is detestable. They are to be put to death. Their blood will be upon their own heads. Right. Leviticus 20:13. I totally forgot which verse that was. I just want to point something out about that. That's Old Testament. Okay. That not only is that Old Testament, that's old law in the Old Testament. That's one of the 613 commandments. Now, do you know why those commandments were put in place in the first place? There's really nothing separating the other 10 from 603 that come after it. Those commandments were done away with when Jesus came back. He fulfilled them. We're done. We don't have to look at them anymore. We don't have to follow them anymore. He fulfilled the old law and replaced it with 2 new laws. Love your neighbor as yourself, and love God with your whole heart, mind, soul, body, and strength. Those are the 2 new commandments. Now, as far as the old commandments, why did it have things like don't do gay things, don't eat pork, don't wear cotton and linen blends. Why were those types of things in those commandments in the first place, I hear you asking? I'll tell you why. Because in the Old Testament, during that time period, when that stuff was written down in the first place, when those laws were put into place, the rabbis were the doctors in the community. So the rabbis commanded people to do things that they believed to be healthy. Pork is really easy to undercook, and if you undercook pork, it ends badly. Trust me, if you've never seen it, if you've never seen a picture of somebody who ate undercooked pork, consider yourself lucky. It's disgusting and horrific. That's why that type of thing was in the Old Testament. It was a health and hygiene thing. You can't sleep with a woman when she's, on her period, for example. It was a health and hygiene thing because the rabbi was the doctor. They recognized that disease spread certain ways and they banned certain things. But as time went on, we got better at understanding disease. We learned about germs, learned what they were and how they work. And we no longer had to wonder why people were just up and dying one day. We had explanations. So there's no need to follow the 613 commandments scripturally, and there's no need logically either. So, yeah, I don't care what reason this guy has for believing that, the 613 commandments should be followed. He's wrong. Plain and simple.
Cautioning people. Look,
Sorry, let's just step back a little bit and listen to get some context. So, going to step back about 10 seconds. Listen again.
The preacher you talk about who delivered a sermon titled Why Leviticus 2013 should still be enforced.
Yeah.
So why gay people should not be allowed to exist. That's really what this is about.
I've been really, cautioning people. Look, we love the sinner, we hate the sin.
Right.
And
Yeah, that's just a cheap and easy way of saying I hate gay people and not getting flack for it.
right now there's a lot of sin to hate out there in the world, right?
Yes.
And we see it all the time. It's in our face, it's in the news, it's on our phones and everything else. It's coming at us from all different directions.
That's what she said.
It's very easy when you start seeing this much depravity out there in front of you.
What depravity are you talking about, first of all? And second, can't people just live their lives? Do they have to live exactly as you command them to live? You know, I live my life exactly the way that a Christian nutcase like this guy would want. I'm married. I don't have extramarital affairs. I don't smoke cigarettes. I don't do drugs. I don't whatever. I live exactly the same way that this guy does, except I don't believe that he's correct about his assessment on God. Except I don't believe that the earth was created in 6 literal days and it's 6,000 years old and all of that other garbage. That's really the only difference between us. But apparently, I'm living in depravity. Simply because I'm not living the way that he wants. Or simply because I don't believe the way that he wants. What happened to freedom? What happened to this country was created, off the idea that people can do what they want. We can live the lives that we want. We don't have to worry about people hating us or attacking us or whatever. What happened to freedom? He never cared about it. He used it to his advantage to further his own interests and goals as far as he could, and that was it. Then he gave up on it. Then he gave up on the idea that freedom is something that should be reached for, something that should be attainable. Like, he has no shame. Dude has no shame.
To lose our focus on the love of God And we have to find a way. Typically the church has only done one or the other. They either elevate grace and mercy and they forget about truth, or they elevate truth and they forget about grace. And we have to really come back to...
Wait, what does that mean? They elevate truth and forget about grace, or they elevate grace and forget about truth? I don't understand what that even means. Let me just listen again, try to understand. This sounds like an empty platitude to me. Does this mean anything?
Love of God. And we have to find a way. Typically the church has only done one or the other. They either elevate grace and mercy and they forget about truth, or they elevate truth and they forget about grace. And we have to really come back to this ability to temper our words. Look, I want my church to be a place where any single person can come.
Yeah, so I feel like what he said just made no sense at all about grace and tempering and mercy and all this other garbage. I don't think that meant anything, but okay.
If they wear a mask, if they're struggling with their sexuality, but here's what I want you to know.
Hey, I got news for you, buddy. Nobody struggles with their sexuality. It's you that struggles with their sexuality, FYI.
My church will be a place to where you will leave transformed.
Right.
You will leave changed. We're not just going to affirm sin. We're not going to go to a place to where we're just saying everything's okay. You're welcome to come and listen. You're welcome to come and hear. We hope that it ministers to you. We're not going to force God on you. We're not trying to create a theocracy. That we...
Oh, yes, you are. You are trying to create a theocracy. You talked about it earlier. You're most definitely trying to do that. How can he say this with a straight face? He knows he's lying here, right?
Have to, make somebody love Jesus or else. We want to invite them to do that. And so we have to temper our words in this. And it's very important that as we are fighting against darkness, that we are making sure that love is going before us in that process.
Yes.
It's a difficult balance, but it's necessary.
I think
So that's really interesting. So he's found... So basically what he's saying is he's trying to focus in on love because he knows that was kind of the crux of Jesus's message. But in the process of claiming to love everybody and allow everybody in, he's telling them they can't really be a full member of the church unless they're not gay, unless they're this or that or whatever, unless they follow his instructions to the letter. He's kind of playing coy with it here. Wait, it's germs, not unclean blood that causes disease? What am I going to do with all these leeches then? Yeah, good point, the fake trumpet one. I appreciate that message. Yeah, good question. What are you going to do with all those leeches? Wasn't it? I feel like it was George Washington who had a fever. This is how the dude died, I think. He had a fever, and they believed that, the doctors at the time, they thought that if they drained blood out of your body, then it would alleviate the fever. So it's bloodletting. So they were draining blood out of George Washington's body to try to stop the fever. And the fever just kept going up, no matter how much blood they drained. So they practically drained the blood completely out of his body. And that's how he died. No blood. If they had just not done that, if they had just allowed him to kind of get over the fever on his own, he would have lived another 10, 15 years probably. It's just like, my God, people, they knew nothing about science, even 100 years ago, did they? Nothing. They had no idea.
Yeah.
you brought
Like,
up
you don't even realize how much we've learned about society and about, like, science and medicine and technology and everything, even over the past 100 years. It's a different world today than it was even 100 years ago. And you're basing your morality off of people that were talking about morality, 6,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago? Really? It just blows me away, dude.
up a great point that I'm watching a lot of pastors that are close friends. Some are people that you just meet along the way. But you brought up this point that I think is getting very blurred from the...
Yeah, I don't know who this guy is, but he's an extremist if he's on this TV show, so...
pulpits. The moral, theological, ethical versus political issues.
Yeah.
Can I ask you this question? Because as a pastor, how do we know the difference between a moral issue? I know it's a stupid question, but it's probably one of the most intellectual questions that this society is wanting to know from a pastor's perspective. How do we identify theological issues when it comes to sexuality, love, versus politicized issues that the Bible...
What the hell is he talking about? I don't understand what he means. How do we identify the difference between what exactly?
has to...
Hold on, let me just step back, see if I can understand what he's asking here. It's like they're offering us empty platitudes that mean nothing.
We identify theological issues when it comes to sexuality, love,
So how do we identify theological issues around love, okay?
versus politicized issues that the Bible...
Versus politicized issues. How do I identify theological issues versus political issues regarding gay marriage, I guess?
Bible has to deal with.
Yeah.
As a pastor, how do we know the difference when it comes to teaching the ideologies that the world's asking and the questions? But from a pastor, how do you deal with that? How do we know?
You know what ideology the world is teaching in all seriousness? I'll tell you. This is the ideology the world's teaching. Leave me the fuck alone and I will leave you alone. That's what the United States is teaching. That's what the U.S. stands for. Leave me alone and I will leave you alone. That's what it's always supposed to be about. But these people don't want that. They don't want to leave you alone. They don't want you to leave them alone. They want you to be forced to worship the way that they worship, to believe the way that they believe. They want you to be forced at the barrel of a gun by the government. That's the belief. Because they know that they hold a disproportionate amount of political power in the United States as evangelicals, and they have the ability to do that kind of thing, to force people to do what they want them to do. That's what it's really all about for these people.
No, how do we identify?
You know, it is a difficult thing to discern, I think, at times.
By the way, that question that he asked, it was nonsense. It meant nothing at all. It was just empty words. There is no correct answer to the question he asked because he didn't ask a question. So listen to his question again and listen to how the guy answers the question that he was just asked.
Issues when it comes to...
Hold on, let me just step back. Nice MacBook, by the way. I love the MacBook.
Moral issue. I know it's a stupid question, but it's
Yeah, kind of stupid.
probably one of the most intellectual questions that this society is wanting to know from a pastor's perspective. How do we identify theological issues when it comes to sexuality, love, versus politicized issues that the Bible has to deal with?
Yeah.
As a
Again, the question made no sense at all, right?
pastor, how do we know the difference when it comes to teaching the ideologies that the world's asking and the questions? But from a pastor, how do you deal with that? How do we...
Okay, that meant nothing. None of that. That is an impossible question to answer. Now let's see how he answers it.
No, how do we identify?
You know, it is a difficult thing to discern, I think, at times. I mean, as Pastor Jim said, every issue to some degree is a theological issue. It's a biblical issue. It's something that we recognize that Scripture speaks to all,
That's
issues
right.
of life and everything, and so...
So when he's asked a question that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, he just kind of falls back on what the last guy said. Okay, fair enough. That's a good way to do it, I suppose.
Everything to some degree has a spiritual aspect to it. When we look at why these things have been politicized, they've been politicized because a particular party in the left has grabbed a hold of a corrupt morality and has made that part of their party platform. They've actually made sin
No.
part of...
The left has made sin part of their party platform? In what way? How? Specifically. Tell me how. Give me an idea of what you're talking about. Give me specifics. completely made up.
Their party platform.
Totally.
And this convolutes it, because now it is a political issue, yes. It's a moral issue, yes. It's also a spiritual issue. And so, a lot of these things kind of invade each of those spaces. And this is why the reality is that everything trickles down from what we believe about God and what we believe about ourselves. So we could say it this way, that culture is downstream of theology. Politics is downstream of culture. And
I don't understand what the hell they're talking about. Culture is downstream from theology. Religion is downstream from culture? What? Is anybody understanding a word they're saying right now? This sounds like complete nonsense to me.
And so when we start diving into this, we have to recognize that unless we address the spiritual aspects of it, even if we solve, let's say we solve the moral thing, that everybody just lived, godly lives, or that we solved the civic issues politically, and we had a great, conservative utopia that we created. It still has.
You notice how they kind of conflated conservative and Christian like that? Conservative utopia and Christian utopia are the same thing in their minds.
Hasn't solved the spiritual problem. And so you can have a great, conservative utopia where people still don't know Jesus. And so I want to.
Oh, there you go. So you separated him a little bit. So he's saying, not only do I want a conservative utopia, I also want a conservative Christian utopia.
Solve the problems politically. I want to solve the problems morally. But that has to start with, as we're fighting those battles on a lower level, simultaneously making sure that the gospel is impacting people to change their lives.
One of the greatest problems facing church people is how to love what they feel is the unlovely.
Yeah.
How to love
Church people, a.k.a. cheaple, if you will. Church people, cheaple.
people that hate them.
Yeah.
And it's like, we're at war.
Yeah.
And yet, Jesus died for sinners.
Yeah.
Jesus died on the cross for sinners. And so the people that we now are having this war against.
Okay, there is no war against anybody, and the fact that you believe there is psychotic. Get help, Jim.
Jesus died for them.
100%.
How do we keep that in mind? How do we win this world when we're almost going to war?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really disturbing when they use language like this, war-like language, like we need to fight these people, we need to kill them effectively, we need to get rid of them permanently, that kind of thing. It's disturbing to hear it because they're talking about us. Anybody that's watching this stream right now, pretty much, you fit into this category. That's who they're talking about. So to hear him say, we're at war with these people, it's just disturbing, man. It's as disturbing as it gets, honestly. I don't believe that I'm at war with anybody. But apparently this guy does.
Look, I think that churches, parents, grandparents, again, we were caught off guard by a lot of this. I don't think that we were fully prepared. And again, it's not too late. We got to plug back in. There's still opportunity to turn the tide on this thing. And I think
on what thing? It's like they're all offering empty platitudes that mean nothing. What the hell are these people talking about right now?
Anyways, I would tell you, I'm very involved in D.C. I'm very involved in a lot of spaces, and I can tell you that there are battles being won all over the place in this nation. I'm very encouraged by that.
Good.
But we still have more work to do.
Yeah.
And so when you look at this, I think that, I feel for the parents and grandparents out there that they have a son or daughter or grandchild that is struggling with their sexuality. And basically,
nobody is struggling with their sexuality except for you. You're the one that struggles with people's sexuality. By and large, people know exactly who they are and what they like. And you are forcing this cognitive dissonance into people's minds where it doesn't belong. Let them be who they are. You know what? You only get one go around here. No matter what, no matter who you are, no matter what you believe, no matter what God you follow, whatever, you only get one spin around this rock. One. Don't waste it. Enjoy your life. Be who you are. Be happy. And if you're not happy, change it. It's never too late to change something, to make a change, to make your life better than it is right now. Never too late.
If you don't accept this, then you don't love me.
Right.
And it feel like it starts cutting off relationship, even if you don't want it to. These things, and there's no easy playbook for this other than truth and grace. Truth and grace. You have to have both. If you just come at somebody with truth, they're going to push away. If you just come at somebody with grace, you're just going to affirm everything, and you're never going to actually point them back to the Lord. And so,
I don't understand what he's saying. So is he saying, when he says truth and grace, is he saying, like, if somebody is gay, for example, some gay family member or something, is he saying that you have to be loving to them? That's the grace portion of it. But you also have to give them what he believes to be the truth, which is that you should hate gay people. Is that what he's saying? I'm really trying to understand here, but it's like it's nonsense.
we have to have both of those things present. I think it takes a lot of listening. I think it takes asking questions. I think we need to be asking more questions. And I think most importantly, it takes we have to eradicate timidity. We have to get to the point to where we're willing to have the tough conversations. And it's not even awkward, that you can sit down with a son or a daughter or a grandchild and say, hey, I know you're going through some stuff. I'd love to understand, what's happening. What would you like me to know about you that would be helpful?
And of course, he believes that, like, if they're gay, then they should have no part in your life in any way, shape, or form. So what he's saying here is you have to sit down with them and have that conversation to convince them. And if they refuse to be convinced to not be gay, then cut them off. That's what he's saying here, really. It doesn't really matter how he's framing it. That's what he's saying.
To understand. And can I tell you some things that I'd like for you to know about me?
Please.
In my love for you, that this would be important. One thing that I do for people out there is I'll tell, if you're really trying to minister to somebody, I would ask them, I would say, hey, I would want to know, can we play a little game? You give me any book you want me to read, 200 pages or so, and I'll give you a book that I'd like you to read, and then let's sit down and talk about it when we're done. And of course,
right. So he's trying to explain almost like a Socratic method of communication with people. And ultimately, the goal is to turn somebody from being gay to being straight. That's the ultimate goal here, which is disturbing and disgusting for all kinds of reasons. But you know what? If a conversation is happening, I'm happy. I think conversations are necessary one way or another. They need to happen. When you're dealing with somebody who is a religious extremist, like the type of people that watch this Jim Bakker program here, these conversations are going to happen with those people, unfortunately, if you want to reveal who you are to them. And it seems like the guy is kind of almost like, what's the word here? Subtly encouraging his listeners, or subtly encouraging the Jim Bakker people to have the conversation instead of cutting them off immediately. Have the conversation, which is good. It's a good thing.
Of course, I tell them to get woke Jesus, right? but and they'll give you a book to read that's meaningful to them, that you're going to be able to, and again, not for the purpose of convincing you or agreeing to these things, but you're going to start seeing where they're coming from, so you know how to minister to them in a different way, and it starts creating conversation, which I think conversation is important to keep relationship going and an open door to be able to minister to somebody.
Wow. Okay. I actually completely agree. I couldn't agree more. That's fantastic. Yes. I'm really glad that this guy seems to be advocating for conversations to take place in Jim Bakker's audience. That's good. That's really good. That's all I've got for you. If you like what I do and you want to see me continue to do it, check me out on Patreon. And let me know if you want to see more stuff like this in the comments. Okay? Thanks for watching, guys.